A seaside couple vanished from their beach house in 1987. In 2025, a hurricane and a routine foundation inspection pry the lot open, and the discovery beneath will shock you. Their life reads like ordinary postcard scenes: coffee on the teak deck, a housekeeper's Tuesday arrival, a morning paper folded on the table until they never return. Workers tear into the old foundation and uncover two bodies, seated upright in a sealed crawlspace, clothing rotted but faces frozen in a wrong, patient stillness. Scratched confessions and a single accusing name on the concrete hint at blackmail, and a contractor who built a room meant to hide people, not hide renovations. How many other foundations hold answers, and who will pay for what was buried for decades? The morning sun catches the salt spray just right, turning the Atlantic into something out of a painting. Margaret Cho pulls her Honda into the gravel drive at exactly 9 o'clock, same as every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 3 years. The Kessler place sits where Ocean Drive curves away from the main strip of beach houses in Seabrook, North Carolina. Far enough from the neighbors to feel private, but close enough to catch the smell of Paul Devereaux's morning coffee when the wind blows south. She collects her cleaning caddy from the trunk, the bottles and brushes rattling like they always do. The sea air is already sticky with July heat, the kind that makes her cotton blouse cling to her shoulders before she's even reached the front steps. Through the sliding glass door to the deck, she can see them. Robert and Diane Kessler, sitting at the teak table Margaret polished just last week, their breakfast spread out between them like a magazine photograph. Robert's reading the Wilmington Star News, one hand holding his coffee cup, and Diane's laughing at something, her head tilted back to catch the sun. They look like people who figured something out that most folks spend their whole lives chasing. Margaret lets herself in through the side door with her key. The house smells like French roast and the ocean, the way it always does in the mornings. She sets her caddy down in the mudroom and slips off her sandals, patting across the cool tile in her bare feet. "Good morning, Margaret," Diane calls through the open door. Her voice carries that warm lilt that made her students love her, back when she was still teaching. "There's fresh coffee if you want some." "I'm good, thank you." Margaret moves into the kitchen, already cataloging what needs attention. The breakfast dishes from yesterday are still in the sink, unusual for Diane, who normally rinses everything before Margaret arrives. A water glass sits abandoned on the counter, a half-moon of lipstick on its rim. She runs the tap, tests the temperature with her fingertips. Behind her, through the open door, she can hear Robert's voice, lower than Diane's, saying something about the charity gala on Saturday. Something about what time they need to leave, whether they should take Oleander Avenue or cut through town. Normal. Everything is so perfectly, unremarkably normal. Margaret works her way through the kitchen, wiping down the granite countertops, loading the dishwasher with yesterday's forgotten plates. She's learned the rhythm of this house over 3 years, learned when to be invisible and when the Kesslers want company. Today, they want to be left alone with their breakfast and their ocean view, so she gives them that. The master bathroom takes longer than usual. Someone, Robert probably from the shaving cream residue, left water running in the tub at some point. Not a lot, just enough to cover the bottom in a cold, still pool. Margaret drains it, wipes down the porcelain until it gleams. In the bedroom, she strips the sheets and remakes the bed with the precision her mother taught her in Seoul, 40 years ago. Hospital corners, pillowcases aligned just so. The room smells faintly of Robert's cologne, something expensive that comes in a black bottle on his dresser. By noon, she's moved to the study, dusting around Robert's desk without touching any of his papers. He's particular about his papers, even if he's retired and supposedly has nothing to be particular about anymore. The phone sits in its cradle, the answering machine blinking with 2 messages nobody's bothered to check. "Margaret." Diane appears in the doorway, backlit by the hall light. She's changed into a yellow sundress, her hair pulled back. "We're going to sit outside for a while. Don't worry about the deck. I'll bring the dishes in later." "You sure? It's no trouble." "I'm sure." Diane smiles, but something flickers across her face that Margaret can't quite read. Distraction, maybe, or worry wearing the mask of contentment. You've done enough. We'll see you Thursday. Thursday morning, 9 o'clock. Perfect. Margaret finishes the study, runs the vacuum through the living room one last time. She packs up her caddy, slips her sandals back on in the mudroom. Through the window, she can see Robert and Diane still on the deck, their heads close together, talking about something that makes Robert's shoulders tense. She lets herself out the side door, locks it behind her out of habit even though the Kesslers never lock anything during the day. Nobody in Seabrook really does, except maybe the tourists who don't know better. The Honda's steering wheel is hot enough to burn when she slides behind it. She cranks the AC, glances back at the house one more time. The sun off the ocean is so bright it turns the windows into mirrors, impossible to see through. Margaret shifts into reverse and heads home. Thursday morning comes in overcast, the sky the color of old dishwater. Margaret makes the drive on autopilot, her mind on the grocery list she needs to finish before her shift at the church rummage sale tomorrow. She almost doesn't notice the unlocked side door until she's already pushing it open. That's wrong. The Kesslers always lock up at night. Hello? Her voice sounds small in the mudroom. Mrs. Kessler? Mr. Kessler? Silence. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that presses on your eardrums. Margaret moves into the kitchen. The dishes are exactly where she saw them Tuesday, still on the deck table. Through the glass door, she can see them sitting there, 2 days of coastal weather etching salt residue across the plates. A gull lifts off from the table as she watches, leaving behind a white smear on the wood. Robert's wallet sits on the kitchen counter beside his keys, right where he always puts them. Margaret's hands have gone cold despite the humidity. She walks through the house like she's underwater, everything slow and wrong. The master bedroom door stands open. The bed is made. She made it Tuesday, but there are clothes on the floor. A polo shirt, khaki shorts, Diane's yellow sundress puddled near the closet like she stepped out of it and kept walking. The bathroom, the tub is half full of cold water, just sitting there, waiting. In Robert's study, the phone is off the hook, lying on the desk blotter. When Margaret picks it up, the dial tone hums in her ear like an insect. She sets it down, picks it up again. Her fingers are shaking as she dials 0 for the operator. I need the police, she says. Something's wrong at the Kessler house. They're not here. But they should be here. The operator asks for the address. Margaret gives it, her voice steady now, trained by years of holding herself together in other people's houses. Stay on the line, ma'am. Through the study window, Margaret can see both cars in the garage. Robert's silver Mercedes, Diane's white Volvo. Neither one has moved since Tuesday. She looks at the phone in her hand, at Diane's purse hanging on its hook by the kitchen door, at the coffee maker with 2 days of grounds going stale in the filter. Outside, the ocean keeps rolling in and rolling out, indifferent as God. And somewhere in the house, in the walls or the floor, or the salt-thick air itself, Margaret feels something watching, something that knows exactly where Robert and Diane Kessler went. She just doesn't know it yet. The patrol car's tires crunch on the crushed shell driveway at 9:47 a.m. Thursday, July 16th. Detective Frank Milhouse, 32 years old, 8 years on the job with the Brunswick County Sheriff's Department, steps out into humidity thick enough to wrap around his throat. The Kessler house sits quiet on its pilings, windows reflecting nothing but overcast sky and the gray churn of the Atlantic beyond. Margaret Cho waits by the side entrance, her cleaning caddy abandoned at her feet. Her hands knot and unknot a dish towel. You were right to call, Milhouse says, pulling out his notebook. Walk me through what you found. She leads him inside. The air conditioning hums, set to 72 degrees. In the kitchen, coffee sits in the pot. Touches the glass carafe and finds it room temperature, the liquid inside filmed over. On the granite counter, Robert Kessler's brown leather wallet, driver's license visible through the plastic window. Car keys on a brass ring shaped like an anchor. $37 in bills. "Both cars?" Milhouse asks. "In the garage. I already looked." He moves to the sliding glass door. On the deck, 2 plates bear the crusty remnants of scrambled eggs. Seagull droppings spatter the table in white streaks. A coffee mug has tipped over, the stain dried to a dark oval. The umbrella is still cranked open, fabric snapping in the wind. Milhouse steps outside. The boards are weathered but solid. He leans over the railing. 30 feet down, the private beach spreads empty except for a tangle of seaweed at the tide line. No footprints visible in the sand. The surf has erased them. Back inside, Margaret shows him the bedroom. The king-sized bed is made with hospital corners, pillows fluffed and arranged, but scattered across the cream carpet. A yellow sundress pooled like spilled paint. Men's khaki shorts crumpled beside it. A polo shirt inside out. White cotton underwear, both his and hers. "They changed clothes," Margaret says quietly. "Fast, maybe, but the bed was already made." Milhouse photographs everything with his department-issue camera, the flash stark in the dim room. He opens the closet. Robert's clothes hang organized by type. Dress shirts, casual shirts, slacks. Diane's side shows a careful arrangement, dresses spaced evenly. Shoe racks full. Suitcases stacked on the upper shelf, none missing. In the master bathroom, he finds it. The tub half filled with water, completely cold to the touch. No soap residue, no damp towels. The water sits clear and still, undisturbed for at least 2 days. "Someone drew a bath and didn't take it," Milhouse murmurs. Margaret hovers in the doorway. "Is that normal?" He doesn't answer. Nothing about this is normal. Robert's study occupies the northwest corner, windows facing the road. The desk is neat, too neat for someone who left in a hurry. Files stacked precisely, pens in a ceramic cup, but the telephone receiver dangles from its coiled cord, swaying slightly in the air conditioning's current. Milhouse lifts it to his ear. Dial tone, steady and patient, waiting for someone to make a call that will never come. He presses the cradle, ending the connection, and notices the notepad beside the phone. The top sheet is blank, but he tilts it toward the window light and sees the ghost impressions of writing. He'll have to get the lab to lift it. "Did they seem worried Tuesday?" he asks Margaret. "Afraid of anything?" She considers this, her face tight with concentration. "No. They talked about the gala. Normal things. Diane laughed at something Robert said about his tie." She touched his hand. "Anyone visit them? Phone calls while you were here?" "The phone rang once, around 10:30. Robert answered in his study. I couldn't hear what he said." Milhouse writes this down. "How long was he on the phone?" "Maybe 5 minutes. When he came out, he looked—" She struggles for the word. "Tight, around the eyes, like he was thinking hard about something." "Did he say anything?" "Just asked if I needed more cleaning supplies. I said no." Milhouse moves through the rest of the house systematically. The guest room undisturbed. The laundry room containing 1 load of whites in the dryer, dry and wrinkled. The pantry fully stocked. In the refrigerator, milk dated to expire July 20th. Leftover lasagna in Tupperware. A bottle of white wine, half empty. People planning to disappear don't leave fresh milk in the fridge. He radios for backup and the department's evidence technician. Within an hour, the house fills with personnel. Bill Kowalski, the tech, dusts for prints while Milhouse walks the perimeter outside. The property sits isolated. Nearest neighbor, 300 yards south, a rental cottage currently vacant according to the property management company. To the north, a quarter-mile of undeveloped dunes. The beach access road runs along the western edge of the lot, unpaved, just packed sand and crushed shells. Tire tracks everywhere, impossible to distinguish. No convenient dropped items. No signs of struggle in the seagrass. By noon, Detective Wayne Parsons arrives from the sheriff's main office. Older, graying, 23 years on the force. He surveys the scene with the expression of a man who's seen everything go wrong in every possible way. "What are we thinking?" Parsons asks. "Walked into the ocean," Milhouse says. "That's what it looks like they want us to think. But you don't buy it. The clothes on the floor, the tub, the phone off the hook." Milhouse shakes his head. "People don't draw a bath, change their clothes, then decide to drown themselves. And if they did, why leave the wallet? Why not take the car to a different beach?" Parsons grunts. "Could be disoriented, medical event, stroke, maybe." Both of them wander down to the water, confused. At the exact same time? Both having strokes? "You got a better theory?" Milhouse doesn't. That's the problem. By 2 p.m., the Coast Guard has 2 boats searching the waters off the Kessler property. By 3 p.m., the sheriff has authorized a dive team. Milhouse watches from the deck as wet-suited figures plunge into the gray water again and again, surfacing empty-handed. The temperature drops as evening approaches. Milhouse stands alone in Robert's study, staring at the notepad. Kowalski managed to lift the impression. A phone number with a 704 area code, Charlotte, and below it, a single word in Robert's handwriting, "Enough." He tries the number. Disconnected. In the kitchen, Margaret Cho sits at the breakfast bar, hands wrapped around the coffee he made her. She hasn't left, though he told her she could. "Did Mr. Kessler ever mention business troubles?" Milhouse asks. "Money problems?" "He said he was retired, happy to be done with all that." "What about visitors? Anyone come to the house for work? Repairs?" She thinks. "The lawn service on Mondays, the pool man every other week. A handyman fixed the deck railing in June." "You remember the handyman's name?" "Samuel something. Mr. Kessler found him through a neighbor." Milhouse writes it down. Probably nothing, but everything is worth noting until it isn't. Friday dawns gray and rough. The dive team expands the search radius to a half-mile offshore. The theory gaining traction is simple. The Kesslers went for an evening swim, got caught in a rip current, drowned together. The bodies will surface eventually, bloated and recognizable, washing up somewhere between here and Cape Fear. Milhouse doesn't argue with the theory because he has nothing solid to replace it with. Just a feeling in his gut. The same feeling he got 3 years ago when the Patterson kid went missing and everyone said runaway until they found him in his uncle's workshop. Dead for 2 weeks. Saturday morning brings the first call from family. Robert's brother in Cleveland, voice tight with controlled panic. He hasn't heard from Robert in 6 months, and no, that wasn't unusual. They weren't close. But this is different. He's catching a flight. Diane's sister calls 2 hours later from Cincinnati. Same story, estranged but concerned. She'll drive down. Neither family pushes hard when Milhouse interviews them Sunday in the conference room at the sheriff's station. Robert's brother Gerald, older, harder, wearing a suit despite the heat, confirms that Robert had taken early retirement from pharmaceutical sales under circumstances Gerald never fully understood. "He was paranoid toward the end," Gerald says. "Thought people were following him, watching the house. I told him he needed to see someone, but Robert never listened to advice." "Did he say who was watching him?" "No. Probably nobody. Robert always had a flair for drama." Diane's sister Carolyn is softer, sadder. She twists a tissue in her hands and talks about how Diane changed after the marriage. "She used to paint. Did you know that? Beautiful watercolors. But Robert didn't like mess, so she stopped." A pause. "The last time we talked, maybe 3 weeks ago, she sounded strange, distracted. I asked if everything was okay and she said fine, but I didn't believe her." "Did she mention anything specific? Anything bothering her?" "She said Robert had been having trouble sleeping, that he'd been spending a lot of time in his study. She asked me if I thought people could change, if someone could become someone different after enough time." "What did you tell her?" "I said I didn't know." Carolyn's eyes fill. "I should have asked more questions." By Monday, the Coast Guard officially suspends active search operations. The divers have found nothing. No bodies, no clothing, no evidence of the Kesslers in the water at all. Milhouse stands on the beach at dusk, 3 days after the couple vanished. The patrol boats power down, navigation lights blinking as they head back to the harbor, and the sound of the engines fades into the steady pulse of the surf. He watches until the boats are only 2 pinpricks of light, then turns toward the dark house and the notepad on the desk, where the word "enough" seems to be his only anchor. The phone on Milhouse's desk rang at 8:47 a.m. on July 21st, cutting through the quiet hum of the Brunswick County Sheriff's Department. He'd been staring at his notes for 20 minutes, the coffee beside him gone cold. Detective Milhouse. He pressed the receiver to his ear, already reaching for his pen. "Frank, it's Paul Devereaux. From Ocean Drive? You asked me to call if I remembered anything else about that van." Milhouse sat forward. "I'm listening." "Well, I was thinking about it last night. Couldn't sleep, with all this business, and I remembered something. The van had North Carolina plates. Commercial ones, I think. The kind contractors use." "You're sure?" "Pretty sure. I mean, I didn't write down the number or anything, but I remember thinking it looked like a work truck, not like the tourist rentals." Milhouse thanked him and hung up. Commercial plates. A contractor's van. He pulled out the notepad he'd photographed from Robert's study, the indentation showing that Charlotte number and the word "enough" pressed hard into the paper. He picked up the phone again, dialing the number for the 3rd time that week. It rang 8 times before a woman answered, her voice clipped and professional. "Hargrave Construction." Milhouse felt something shift in his chest. "Ma'am, this is Detective Frank Milhouse with the Brunswick County Sheriff's Department. I'm trying to reach Samuel Hargrave. He's on a job site. Can I take a message?" "What kind of work does Mr. Hargrave do?" A pause. "Residential construction. Foundations, mostly. Renovations. Why? Has he done any work in the Seabrook area?" Another pause, longer this time. "I'd have to check the files. Is there a problem?" "Just gathering information. When did he last work in Seabrook?" "Detective, I really think you should talk to Sam directly. I can have him call you when he gets back." Milhouse gave her the number and hung up, then immediately called the county clerk's office in Southport. It took 20 minutes of waiting on hold before someone pulled the property records for 1447 Ocean Drive. "Looks like there was a permit application filed in 1984, the clerk said. "Foundation update. Applicant was, let me see, Hargrave Construction out of Charlotte. Permit was issued but never closed out. No final inspection." "Who signed for the property owner?" "Robert Kessler." Milhouse wrote the name carefully in his notebook, Samuel Hargrave. Then he called Paul Devereaux back. "Paul, you said you've lived on Oceans. Drive for how long?" "Since 1983. Moved down from Raleigh." "You know the Kesslers well?" "Well enough to wave to. Robert kept to himself mostly. Diane was friendlier." "Did they ever have construction work done? Renovations?" Paul was quiet for a moment. "Yeah, actually. Back in '84, I think. They had some foundation work done. Fixed some settling issues from the original cottage. I remember because the contractor asked to use my driveway to turn his truck around a few times." Milhouse's pulse quickened. "You remember the contractor's name?" "Sam something. Nice guy. Real professional. Actually, I think I recommended him to the Kesslers. He'd done some work on my dock, did a good job." "Sam Hargrave? That's it. You think he's got something to do with this?" "I don't know yet." "What kind of truck did he drive?" "Dark blue van. Had his company name on the side." "Why?" Milhouse felt the pieces beginning to align, though the picture they formed was still murky. "The van you saw Tuesday night, could it have been his?" A long silence. When Paul spoke again, his voice had changed. "Jesus, Frank, I mean, it could have been. I didn't see it up close. But the color's right. Don't jump to conclusions. I'm just following leads." But after he hung up, Milhouse sat very still, staring at his notes. A contractor who'd done unpermitted work on the house. A dark van. A phone number with enough written beneath it. Robert's paranoia about being watched. He called the Charlotte number again. This time, a man answered on the second ring. Hargrave Construction. Mr. Hargrave, this is Detective Frank Milhouse, Brunswick County Sheriff's Department. I need to ask you some questions about a job you did in Seabrook back in 1984. Seabrook? The voice was easy, relaxed. That was a while ago. Which property? 14 and 47 Ocean Drive. Robert and Diane Kessler. Oh, sure. Foundation work. Nice folks. Is there a problem with the work? I guarantee everything I do. When's the last time you saw the Kesslers? Geez, I don't know. Had to be 84, 85 maybe? I finished that job and moved on. Why? They've been reported missing. A beat of silence. Missing? What do you mean, missing? They disappeared from their home last Tuesday. I'm interviewing everyone who knew them. I didn't really know them, Detective. I did a job for them 4 years ago. That's it. The permit was never closed out. There was no final inspection. Hargrave's tone shifted, became slightly defensive. That's on the county, not me. I filed for inspection. If they didn't show up, that's their problem. The work was solid. Where were you last Tuesday, July 14th? You've got to be kidding me? Now there was irritation in his voice. You think I had something to do with this? I'm just establishing timelines, Mr. Hargrave. I was in Virginia Beach. Started a job there last Monday. Been there all week. You can call the client if you want. Better yet, call the Lighthouse Inn on Atlantic Avenue. I've been staying there since last Sunday. Milhouse wrote it down. I'll need that client's information. Hargrave provided it, his voice tight. When Milhouse hung up, he immediately called the Lighthouse Inn. The desk clerk confirmed that a Samuel Hargrave had checked in Sunday, July 12th, and was still registered as a guest. Then he called the Virginia Beach client, who confirmed Hargrave had been on site every day since Monday morning. Solid alibi, multiple witnesses. Milhouse leaned back in his chair, frustrated. The pieces had seemed to fit, but now they scattered again. He looked at the map he'd tacked to the bulletin board, with pins marking Seabrook and Charlotte. Virginia Beach was 3 hours north. Hargrave couldn't have been in two places at once. Unless. He picked up the phone again, called the client back. What time did Mr. Hargrave arrive on site each day? Let me check my logs. Monday, he got there around 8:30. Tuesday, looks like he showed up closer to 4 in the afternoon. Said he had to handle some supply issues in the morning. Wednesday and Thursday, he was there first thing. Milhouse felt that shift again. 4 in the afternoon Tuesday? Yeah, worked late to make up for it, though. Milhouse did the math. Virginia Beach to Seabrook was about 3 hours. If Hargrave left early Tuesday morning, he could have reached Seabrook by mid-morning, been there for several hours, and still made it back to Virginia Beach by 4. Barely, if he pushed the speed limit. He called the Lighthouse Inn again. Did Mr. Hargrave's vehicle leave the property Tuesday morning? Sir, I work the evening shift. I wouldn't know about the daytime. Dead end, but not quite. Milhouse hung up and stared at his notebook. The alibi had a gap. 6 hours, maybe more. Just enough. He wrote another note. Check for traffic stops, toll records, gas stations between VA Beach and Seabrook, July 14th. Then he looked at the last item on his desk, the photo Margaret had provided of Robert and Diane from the previous Christmas. They stood on their deck, the ocean behind them, Robert's arm around Diane's shoulders, both smiling. "Where are you?" Milhouse whispered to the photograph. But the house on Ocean Drive kept its silence, and the foundation beneath it held its secret. 3 more neighbors would call over the next 2 days, each with fragmentary memories that meant nothing alone. A sound like hammering late one night years ago, a utility van they'd seen but couldn't place, the sense that the Kessler house always felt odd in ways they couldn't articulate. Milhouse documented each call, filed each statement and watched as the case began to cool. By August, even he had to admit the trail had gone cold. The file sat open on Detective Frank Milhouse's desk like an accusation. 3 months of work, interviews, searches, phone records, background checks, condensed into 47 pages. That answered nothing. Outside his office window, January rain blurred the view of Seabrook's main street, turning the world gray and indistinct. He read through the timeline again, though he'd memorized every entry. July 14, 1987. Last confirmed sighting by Margaret Cho, 2 p.m. July 16, discovery of abandoned home. July 17, 19. Coast Guard search, no results. July 19, family interviews, vague concerns about Robert's paranoia. July 21, Samuel Hargrave questioned, alibi verified with noted 6-hour gap. August 3rd. Last credible lead exhausted. The pages felt thin between his fingers. Too thin for 2 lives. His partner, Wayne Parsons, knocked once and entered without waiting. He carried 2 paper cups of coffee from the diner down the street, steam rising from the plastic lids. "You're still at it," Wayne said. It wasn't a question. Milhouse accepted the coffee without looking up. The gap in Hargrave's alibi. 6 hours is enough to drive to Virginia Beach and back, we know. Wayne settled into the chair across from him, the old wood creaking under his weight. "We checked every gas station between here and there. No receipts, no sightings, nothing. Doesn't mean he didn't do it. Doesn't mean he did." Wayne took a long sip, his weathered face neutral. "Frank, I know you don't want to hear this, but we've got nothing. No body, no witness, no physical evidence. The family isn't pushing. Even the Kesslers' lawyer said Robert was talking about starting over somewhere a few months before they vanished." Milhouse finally met his partner's eyes. Their cars were in the garage. "Could have taken a cab to the airport. Wallet and purse left behind. Staged. People do it all the time when they want to disappear clean. The bathtub, Wayne, half full of cold water. The clothes on the floor. The phone off the hook." Milhouse's voice remained steady, but his jaw tightened. "That's not staging. That's interruption." Wayne nodded slowly, acknowledging the point without conceding it. "Maybe. But interruption by what? We searched that house top to bottom, crawled under it, checked the attic, pulled up carpet looking for blood. Nothing. You saw the place. It was clean." The word echoed wrong in Milhouse's mind. Clean. Too clean, maybe. He thought of Robert's study, the meticulous rows of books, the desk without a single loose paper. A man who kept everything in order wouldn't leave a phone dangling off the hook unless something had gone catastrophically wrong. "The foundation permit," Milhouse said. "Hargrave filed it in '84, but there's no inspection record. No closure." Contractors skip that stuff all the time, especially back then. You know how it was. Handshake deals, cash under the table. Wayne leaned forward, his voice gentler. "I know what you're thinking. I know you want this to be solvable. But sometimes people just go, and we never find out why." Milhouse looked down at the file again. 47 pages. He could add more, re-interview the neighbors, check Robert's pharmaceutical contacts, drive to Charlotte and shake down Hargrave in person. But Wayne was right about one thing. They had no probable cause, no evidence, no leverage. The case had run into a wall built of absence and silence. "The captain wants a decision," Wayne said quietly. "Active or inactive?" Through the window, Milhouse watched a woman hurrying through the rain, collar pulled up against the weather. She reminded him of Diane Kessler. Small, quick movements, the way Margaret had described her. Somewhere out there, the Kesslers were either living under new names or they were dead. And if they were dead, someone had gotten away with it. His hand moved to the rubber stamp at the edge of his desk. Inactive. The word that meant the department was moving on, that resources would go elsewhere, that Robert and Diane Kessler would become a footnote in Seabrook's history. "Frank," Wayne prompted. Milhouse picked up the stamp. Its wooden handle was smooth from decades of use, worn by other detectives who'd faced other impossible cases. How many times had this stamp marked the end of someone's search for answers? He positioned it over the file's cover page where the Kesslers' names were typed in neat capitals. His thumb rested on top, ready to press down. 1 year, he said. Give me 1 year, and if nothing breaks— 6 months, Wayne countered, and you can't let it consume you. We've got other cases. Milhouse set the stamp down without using it. 6 months. Wayne stood, retrieving his coffee cup. At the door, he paused. For what it's worth, I hope you're right. I hope there's something to find. His expression suggested he didn't believe it. But Frank, sometimes the ocean doesn't give things back. You know that. After Wayne left, Milhouse pulled out a fresh legal pad and wrote a single question at the top. Why would Hargrave lie about the time? If the contractor's alibi was honest, if he'd truly been in Virginia Beach all day, why would he arrive late to a job site and risk his credibility? The rain intensified, drumming against the window in rhythmic waves. Milhouse added more questions. What was Robert afraid of in the months before retirement? What changed Diane from an artist to a nervous housewife? Who called Robert on July 14th, and what did they say to make him write enough? The pad filled slowly, each question branching into others. At the bottom of the page he wrote, Check Hargrave's other jobs. Has he worked for other isolated couples? It was a thread, thin as spider silk, but it was something. 1 year later, July 1988, the Kessler house stood at the end of Ocean Drive with a for sale sign planted in the sandy front yard. The price had dropped twice. The realtor, a cheerful woman from Wilmington, struggled to bring clients past the threshold. Even scrubbed and staged, the house carried a weight that had nothing to do with its architecture. Margaret. Cho walked past it on her way to her new cleaning job 3 blocks south. She'd refused to enter the Kessler property after that July morning when she'd found it empty. Mrs. Henderson, her current employer, was understanding. Of course you don't want to go back there, she'd said. I wouldn't either. But walking past was unavoidable unless Margaret wanted to add 10 minutes to her route, and she couldn't afford the lost time. So she moved quickly, eyes fixed on the weathered boardwalk ahead, hands gripping her canvas supply bag. The house watched her. She felt it every time, a prickle between her shoulder blades like someone standing at the window. Once she'd given in and glanced back. The windows were dark and empty, curtains drawn. But the feeling persisted. On the beach, a young couple tossed a frisbee, their laughter carrying on the salt wind. They were new to Seabrook, probably tourists. The locals knew better than to linger near the Kessler place. Kids on bicycles would pedal faster as they passed. Joggers crossed to the opposite side of the street. The town had absorbed the disappearance into its folklore. At the Sandpiper Grill, where fishermen gathered over eggs and bitter coffee, the story had evolved into something almost mythical. Some said the Kesslers had been running from the mob. Others whispered about a murder-suicide pact, the bodies taken out on Robert's boat in the dead of night. Never mind that the Kesslers didn't own a boat. The truth, that no one knew anything, was less satisfying than speculation. Margaret reached Mrs. Henderson's driveway and finally allowed herself to breathe normally. Behind her, the Kessler house settled in the humid afternoon, its foundation solid, its secrets sealed beneath fresh concrete and 40 years of Carolina clay. Detective Milhouse's 6-month extension had come and gone. In January 1988, he'd pressed the stamp down himself, the ink leaving its mark across the cover page. Inactive. The file went into a banker's box with 3 other cold cases and disappeared into the evidence room, stored between a 1979 hit-and-run and a 1985 arson. Wayne Parsons had clapped him on the shoulder, relief evident in his posture. "You did what you could," he'd said. Milhouse didn't argue. He'd followed the thread as far as it would go, checking Hargrave's work history across 3 states. He'd found nothing, or rather, nothing provable. a couple in Virginia who'd hired Hargrave in 1982, then moved abruptly to Arizona. A widow in South Carolina who'd paid for renovations, then sold her house within a year. Patterns that might mean something or might mean nothing at all. The ocean kept its silence. The house kept its secrets. And Seabrook moved forward one day at a time, the way small towns always do, by forgetting what it couldn't explain. The television above the hotel bar showed the familiar spiral of a hurricane, angry and immense, churning across the Atlantic toward the Carolina coast. Jennifer Tang barely glanced at it as she swirled her martini, half listening to the meteorologist's practiced urgency. She'd weathered 3 storm seasons since buying the Seabrook property. This would be her 4th. "Miss Tang," the front desk clerk approached with practiced deference. "We have your storm shutters being installed tomorrow morning, as requested. The contractor says with the current forecast track—" "I saw the forecast." Jennifer set down her glass. "Just make sure they're done by Friday evening. I have a conference call at 9 Saturday morning I can't miss." The clerk nodded and retreated. Jennifer returned her attention to her tablet, scrolling through quarterly projections that mattered far more than wind speeds and tidal surges. Hurricane Helena was a Category 4. Yes, but her beach house had been engineered to modern standards. Reinforced concrete, impact-resistant glass, foundation inspection certificates framed in the utility closet like diplomas. The house would be fine. It always was. By Thursday, March 19, 2025, the certainty had begun to crack. Jennifer stood in her living room, what used to be her living room, watching through the boarded windows as the ocean transformed into something biblical. The storm shutters rattled with each gust, a metallic percussion that made her jaw tight. Rain didn't fall so much as materialize horizontally, sheeting against the house in visible waves. The power had failed at 2 p.m. Her backup generator hummed in the garage, keeping the refrigerator alive and her phones charged, but it couldn't drown out the deeper sound beneath the wind, a grinding, relentless roar as the Atlantic ate the beach. Her cell service flickered. 1 bar, 2, gone. She'd declined the mandatory evacuation order, confident in engineering and unwilling to abandon her property to looters. Now, alone in the groaning house, she wondered if confidence and stubbornness were the same thing. The floor shuddered. Jennifer froze, martini glass forgotten on the granite counter. The vibration came again, deeper this time, as if the earth itself had shifted. She moved to the window, peering through a gap in the shutters. What she saw made her breath catch. The beach was gone. Completely gone. Where 30 yards of sand dunes had stood that morning, there was only churning brown water, waves crashing directly against what used to be her property line. As she watched, a particularly massive surge rolled in, and she heard it, a sound like breaking teeth, as the retaining wall collapsed into the sea. Another shudder ran through the house, stronger now. A hairline crack appeared in the drywall near the ceiling. Jennifer grabbed her phone and ran. The hotel in Jacksonville felt absurdly normal. Clean towels, complimentary breakfast, a parking lot full of other refugees from the coast, their cars stuffed with photo albums and pets and the random objects people grabbed when fleeing. Jennifer sat on the edge of the bed, watching the news. Seabrook was underwater. Ocean Drive, her street, had been hit by a storm surge measured at 14 feet. The footage showed houses she recognized, some collapsed, others standing at drunken angles, the beach completely reshaped. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Miss Tang, this is Ron Carmichael with Coastal Structural Engineering. You called about an emergency assessment?" "Yes." Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "My foundation, I think it's compromised. The beach erosion—" "We're booking out 3 weeks minimum, ma'am. Every property on that coast needs assessment. If you've got active collapse in progress, I can maybe get a team out Monday, but Monday's fine." She'd already done the math. The house might be savable. The foundation could be reinforced. This was fixable. Everything was fixable with enough money and the right contractors. "I'll need access," Carmichael said. "Keys, alarm codes, the works, and any original construction documents you have, blueprints, permits, inspection certificates. I'll email everything tonight." After she hung up, Jennifer opened her laptop and navigated to the folder she'd received from the title company at closing. The house had been renovated twice since she'd bought it, once in 1995, once in 2008. The permits were all there, neat digital scans. She scrolled down to the oldest documents, purely out of thoroughness. There, a property survey from 1983, showing the original structure, a small beach cottage built in 1947, purchased by Robert and Diane Kessler in 1983, renovated 1984-1985. Jennifer paused. The name Kessler tickled something in her memory, but she couldn't place it. She made a note to ask the realtor, then continued compiling the engineering documents. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. Monday morning arrived bright and mocking, the sky scrubbed clean by Helena's passing. Jennifer met Ron Carmichael and his crew at the property line, or where the property line used to be. The beach had been carved away, leaving a raw cliff of sand and exposed pipes. Her house sat 30 feet back from the new edge, visibly tilted. "Jesus," Carmichael muttered, surveying the damage with a laser level. "You evacuate when they tell you to, Miss Tang. This whole structure could have gone in. Can it be saved?" He walked the perimeter, his crew fanning out with equipment. One of them, a young woman with a clipboard, kept shaking her head. "Maybe," Carmichael said finally. "We need to see what's going on with the foundation. The tilt suggests differential settling. One side dropped more than the other. Could be undermining, could be structural failure. We'll know more when we excavate." "How long?" "Assuming we don't find anything weird. 4 days to assess, another week to engineer a solution, 6 weeks to actually fix it if we're doing pilings." He paused. "Assuming we don't find anything weird." The excavation began that afternoon. By Seedumen, Tuesday, they'd found something weird. Jennifer got the call at her hotel. Carmichael's voice had changed, flattened by confusion. "Miss Tang, you need to come to the site. We've hit something unusual." "Unusual how?" "There's a second foundation, under yours. Your house was built on top of an older structure, and that older structure is what's failing." Jennifer grabbed her keys. "I'll be there in 20 minutes." The excavation had opened a wound in the earth. A backhoe sat idle while Carmichael's crew clustered around a rectangular pit, speaking in low voices. Jennifer approached, her heels sinking into the displaced sand. "There." Carmichael pointed into the hole. Beneath the modern concrete foundation of her house, exposed by the excavation, was an older foundation. Rough concrete and cinder block stained dark by decades of moisture. But that wasn't the unusual part. The unusual part was the space between them. "See that gap?" Carmichael climbed down into the pit, gesturing to a hollow cavity visible where the old foundation had crumbled away. "This shouldn't exist. When they built your house in 85, they should have demolished this completely. Instead, they just built over it, created this void between the new and old structures." Jennifer stared at the darkness between the two slabs of concrete. Why would anyone do that? Laziness, probably. Cutting corners. But it's what's causing your settling. This whole void collapsed during the storm. One of the crew members, a man in a hard hat and reflective vest, appeared at the edge of the pit. "Ron, we got a problem." Carmichael climbed out. Jennifer followed. The man led them to the far side of the excavation, where the backhoe had torn away a section of the old foundation. The cavity was larger here, the gap between foundations widening into a crawlspace nearly 4 feet high. "I was about to start clearing debris," the man said, his voice tight, "but then I saw—" He aimed his work light into the darkness. Jennifer saw shapes, pale, irregular forms that resolved slowly into terrible clarity. 2 figures sitting upright against the far wall. Skeletal but preserved, dressed in rotted fabric. their hands positioned strangely in their laps, their heads tilted toward each other as if in conversation. The screaming came from somewhere far away, and it took Jennifer a full 3 seconds to realize it was her own voice. She stumbled backward, heels scraping in the loose sand, as one of the crew, the young woman with the clipboard, reached out and grabbed her arm. Someone barked for the sight to be cleared. Ron's face had gone hard. He was already speaking into his radio, calling local authorities. They moved Jennifer away from the pit. She couldn't stop staring at the two pale forms, at the way the fabric clung to brittle bone. The name from the survey swam up in her mind. Kessler. An old house, an old couple. And for the first time the past felt like something that had been waiting under the floorboards. A sheriff's cruiser arrived 10 minutes later, lights cutting through the bright March air. Officers photographed the scene, cordoned off the excavation, and asked questions in professional, flat tones. Someone covered the bodies with a tarpaulin. Someone else took Jennifer's statement while she kept repeating the same useless sentence. I didn't know. When the first shock faded, she sat in the back of a patrol car and watched the house through the open door of the pit, the new foundation like a pale mouth over a secret. Carmichael stood nearby, hands on his hips, and for once there was nothing about engineering that could make it better. Later, at the hotel, Jennifer opened the 1983 survey again and stared at the name until the letters blurred. Outside, the Atlantic had calmed to a bruised, indifferent gray. Inside, the house that had been the center of her certainty had become a place where someone else's ending was folded into the floor. She called her realtor and the number for the county records office. She called the one person she trusted to help her think straight. Her voice was thin, and every time she tried to explain, the image of the two figures rose up and filled the silence. The county coroner would later confirm identities. The investigation would unspool papers and permits, reveal corner cutting and forgotten names and decisions that had literal weight. But in the bright, careful present of the hotel room, all Jennifer could do was sit and listen to the slow wind through the palm trees and think about the gap beneath her feet. How something hidden can stay hidden for decades until a storm and a shovel and a terrible small piece of luck pry it open. The excavator's bucket had carved a 20-foot trench along the western foundation when the concrete gave way with a sound like a dry branch snapping. The operator, a broad-shouldered man named Curtis Webb, felt the change in resistance before he saw it. The way his machine suddenly lurched forward as material that should have held firm crumbled like old chalk. He killed the engine. In the sudden quiet, gulls screamed overhead and waves crashed against what remained of Jennifer Tang's beachfront. "Ron!" Curtis climbed down from the cab, his boots crunching on pulverized concrete. "You're gonna want to see this." Engineer Ron Carmichael picked his way across the debris field, hard hat catching the morning sun. The hurricane had transformed the lot into a moonscape of exposed rebar and shattered foundation. Behind him, 3 other crew members paused their work, sensing something in Curtis's tone. The hole gaped like a wound in the old foundation layer. Curtis crouched at its edge, peering into darkness that his work light couldn't quite penetrate. The smell hit him first. Not decay exactly, but something dry and wrong, like air that had been trapped too long. "What have you got?" Ron knelt beside him, unclipping the heavy-duty flashlight from his belt. "Cavity, big one. Shouldn't be there." Ron swept the beam across the opening. The light caught on smooth concrete walls forming a rectangular chamber approximately 8 feet deep. Construction debris littered the floor, lengths of 2x4 gone soft with age, crumpled plastic sheeting, what might have been old newspaper. Jesus! Ron sat back on his heels. This whole space was sealed. Deliberately. Jennifer Tang appeared at the trench's edge, picking her way carefully in designer boots meant for Manhattan sidewalks, not disaster zones. "How bad is it? Can we reinforce from underneath, or—" Her question died as she registered the men's faces. "Ms. Tang, step back, please." Ron's voice carried a careful authority. "Curtis, give me a hand. We need to widen this opening." 20 minutes of careful work with crowbars and sledgehammers expanded the hole enough for a man to fit through. Ron positioned his flashlight at a better angle, and this time the beam traveled deeper into the chamber, illuminating the far wall. That's when he saw them. Two figures sat against the concrete, side by side, their bodies rigid in a terrible mockery of rest. The dry environment had preserved them in a way that made them look almost fake. Skin drawn tight over bone, mouths open in silent screams or final prayers, empty eye sockets fixed on the sealed space that had become their tomb. The woman wore the rotted remnants of a yellow dress. The man's polo shirt had faded to the color of old ivory. Their hands were positioned strangely, wrists touching as if they'd been bound together, though no rope or restraints remained. Ron stumbled backward so fast he nearly fell. "Get back! Everyone get back from the hole!" Curtis reached the edge just as Ron shouted. The younger man's work light swept across the scene, and his breakfast came up in a violent rush, splashing against the broken concrete. Jennifer Tang stood frozen, her face blank with incomprehension. "What?" "Call 911. Ron's voice shook. "Tell them we found human remains. 2 bodies. Tell them this is a crime scene." The Seabrook Police Department's first responder arrived within 12 minutes. A young officer named Sanchez who took one look into the cavity and immediately called for backup, the medical examiner, and Detective Allison Cross from the county's cold case unit. By noon, the property was cordoned off with yellow tape that snapped in the salt wind. A forensics tent shielded the excavation site from passing helicopters and the morbidly curious already gathering on Ocean Drive. The medical examiner's van sat in what had been Jennifer's driveway. Cross arrived at 12:47, her unmarked sedan navigating the debris-strewn street. She was compact and pragmatic, 53 years old with cropped brown hair and the weathered face of someone who'd spent too many hours reading files in bad light. Her eyes missed nothing. Ron Carmichael met her at the tape line, still shaken. Detective Cross? Ron. She'd worked with him on 2 previous cases involving structural failures that had uncovered old crimes. "Talk to me." He walked her through it. The hurricane damage, Jennifer Tang's emergency call, the discovery of the older foundation beneath the newer one, the sealed cavity that should never have existed. His hands trembled as he gestured toward the tent. "Preservation is remarkable," he said quietly. "Sealed environment, consistent temperature, they look almost mummified." Cross ducked under the tape. "I need to see." The cavity had been carefully exposed now, the opening widened enough for safe access. Portable lights illuminated the chamber with clinical brightness. The medical examiner, Dr. Patricia Voss, was already on site, photographing the scene from every angle before any evidence was disturbed. "Allison." Patricia looked up, her camera briefly lowering. "This is going to be a long day." Cross approached the edge and looked down. Even after 23 years in law enforcement, even after cases involving buried bodies and hidden graves, the sight stopped her cold. They'd died together. That much was immediately clear. The male victim's head tilted toward the female, as if he'd turned to her in those final moments. Their bodies had settled over time, but the positioning suggested they'd been conscious when sealed in, sitting upright, backs against the wall, waiting for rescue that never came. "Any ID on them?" Cross's voice sounded distant to her own ears. "Not yet, but check the wall behind them." Patricia's assistant repositioned a work light. The beam caught faint scratches in the concrete, barely visible after decades but preserved by the darkness. Letters, words, whole sentences carved with something sharp. A nail, maybe, or a piece of metal. Cross's heart rate kicked up. "Can you read it?" "Some of it. We'll need better lighting and UV to pull out the rest." Patricia zoomed her camera. "But the last line is clear. Female handwriting, different from the rest. It says, 'We heard you calling for us.'" The words landed like a physical blow. Cross closed her eyes, her mind already racing through databases, through cold cases, through disappearances that had never been solved. How long have they been down there? Decades, maybe 30, 40 years. The clothing suggests 80s, possibly late 70s. We'll know more when we extract them and run tests. Jennifer Tang stood at a distance, wrapped in a blanket despite the 70-degree temperature. Cross approached her, keeping her voice gentle. "Ms. Tang, I know this is difficult. I need to ask, when did you purchase this property?" 2022. Jennifer's words came out flat, mechanical. "March 2022. 3 years ago. I've been living here for 3 years." "And the previous owner?" "A couple from Charlotte. They'd owned it since 2008. Before that, I don't know. My realtor handled everything." Cross made a note. "We're going to need access to all your property records. Title history, previous surveys, renovation permits, everything you have. There's a file in my office, 3rd floor. If the house is still—" Jennifer's voice cracked. "Are they going to arrest me?" "I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know." "No one's arresting you. You're a witness, not a suspect." Cross touched her arm briefly. "But I need you to stay available. We'll have questions." By mid-afternoon, the extraction began. It was delicate, painstaking work. Dr. Voss and her team descended into the cavity on portable scaffolding, documenting every detail before disturbing the remains. Each item of clothing, each scrap of material, each scratch on the wall was photographed, measured, catalogued. Cross stood at the edge, watching. The male victim's wallet emerged first, the leather preserved but brittle. Inside, a North Carolina driver's license issued in 1985. The photo faded but visible. Robert Dwayne Kessler, born April the 12th, 1945. Address, 2247. Ocean Drive, Seabrook, North Carolina. Cross felt something click into place, a case she'd reviewed during her first week in cold cases, a file that had nagged at her with its incompleteness. "Check the county database," she told Sanchez. "Disappearance reported 1987. Robert and Diane Kessler." The confirmation came back in minutes. Missing persons report filed July 16, 1987, by housekeeper Margaret Cho. Last seen July 14th. Never found. Case inactive since January 1988. Cross stared down at the bodies that had been beneath this property for 38 years, beneath the feet of search parties, beneath the homes of families who'd never known, beneath everything. "We're bringing them home," she said quietly. By evening, both bodies had been carefully removed and transported to the medical examiner's office in Wilmington. The cavity stood empty now, its lights casting harsh shadows on the scratched concrete walls. Cross climbed down herself, needing to see it from their perspective, needing to understand. The space was tight, maybe 6 feet by 8 feet, barely tall enough to stand. No windows, no ventilation. The only opening had been the one her crew had smashed through that morning. She imagined Robert and Diane Kessler sitting here in absolute darkness, breathing stale air, listening to sounds from above, calling out until their voices gave out. The wall scratches told a story. Cross ran her gloved fingers over the rough concrete, feeling the desperate labor each word had required. "We need full forensic documentation of every mark," she radioed up to Patricia. "Every word, every scratch. This is their testimony." "Already on it. UV team is standing by." Cross climbed out as sunset painted the ruined lot in shades of orange and red. The ocean whispered against the eroded beach, the same sound the Kesslers would have heard from their deck 38 years ago, never knowing that their morning, coffee and normal conversation would be their last. She walked to her car, already mentally composing the case file she'd built from scratch. Somewhere in the archives, Detective Frank Milhouse's original investigation waited. Somewhere in this town, someone knew the answers, and Cross intended to find them. The medical examiner's van had departed an hour ago, taking the Kesslers' remains to the state forensics lab in Raleigh. Now, in the harsh illumination of portable work lights, The crawlspace beneath Jennifer Tang's home resembled an archaeological excavation site, minus the romance, plus the horror. Detective Allison Cross stood at the edge of the cavity, hands on her hips, studying the rectangular tomb with the methodical patience that had solved 17 cold cases in her 12-year career. The space measured approximately 8 feet long, 5 feet wide, 3 feet high. Precise, intentional. The product of someone who understood foundations and knew exactly what they were creating. Detective. A forensics technician named Marcus Riley emerged from the opening, his Tyvek suit dusty with decades of accumulated grit. "You're going to want to see this." Cross ducked into the space, ignoring the instinctive claustrophobia that tightened her chest. The air inside was stale, desert dry, the same aridity that had preserved the bodies. Her flashlight beam swept across the concrete walls, catching on irregularities in the surface. "Here," Marcus said, directing his own light to the far wall. "And here. All 4 walls, actually. Scratches, not random wear from settling or erosion, but deliberate marks carved into the concrete with something metal, a belt buckle maybe, or a watch clasp." Cross leaned closer, her breath shallow. The marks formed letters, words, sentences, a chronicle etched in desperation. "Can we get better lighting in here?" she asked. 20 minutes later, a generator hummed outside, feeding a network of LED panels that transformed the tomb into a crime scene worthy of her full attention. Cross photographed each wall systematically, then began the painstaking work of transcription. The north wall, nearest where the bodies had been positioned, bore the earliest entries. The handwriting was aggressive, angular, masculine. Tuesday night. Hargrave came. Had a gun, knew about the documents. Wanted $50K or he'd go to police and FDA. Said he'd built this space in '84. Forced us in here. Said he'd be back. Cross's pen moved steadily across her notebook. The next section, scratched below the first, showed deteriorating penmanship. Wednesday. No water left. Diane, sleeping. Flashlight, dying. If anyone finds this, Samuel Hargrave. Hargrave Construction. Charlotte. He did this. The east wall held a different confession, the letters smaller, more cramped. "I stole the Altrex formulas. Planned to sell them. Diane didn't know until last month. This is my fault. My paranoia was right, but I should have gone to police. Should have told the truth. I'm sorry." Cross recognized the pharmaceutical company name. Altrex had gone bankrupt in 1989, embroiled in some patent litigation. Whatever Robert had stolen had died with the company. She moved to the south wall. Thursday, I think. Heard voices outside, someone calling our names. Couldn't make them hear. Tried screaming until throat bled. They're so close. The final wall, the west side, held the briefest entries. Robert's handwriting had degraded to barely legible scratches. Friday. Diane. Weak. Tell her family. The sentence trailed off, unfinished. Below it, in a distinctly different hand, rounder, trembling, feminine, was the message that would haunt Cross for the rest of her career. "We heard you calling for us. We're so sorry we couldn't answer." Cross stood motionless, her flashlight steady on those words. The search parties. Frank Milhouse's teams combing the property in July 1987, shouting the Kesslers' names, while Robert and Diane lay in this sealed box beneath their feet, dying inch by inch in the dark. "Detective?" Marcus stood at the opening. "We found something else." She followed him to a corner of the space where the concrete floor had cracked during the hurricane. Wedged in the fissure was a small object. A woman's wristwatch, the crystal shattered, the hands frozen at 3:17. The band was broken, suggesting Diane had used the buckle to scratch the walls. "Bag it," Cross said quietly. Back outside, the late afternoon sun was sinking toward the Atlantic, painting the churned excavation site in shades of amber and rust. Jennifer Tang sat in her car in the driveway on her phone with her attorney. The property had become a crime scene, her home uninhabitable, her life upended by people who died before she was born. Cross walked to the street, pulling out her own phone. She scrolled through her contacts until she found the listing. Millhouse Frank, Redumby. He answered on the second ring. "Cross, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, Frank. I'm calling about the Kessler case, your Kessler case." A long pause. "You found them?" "This morning, in a hidden crawlspace under the foundation of their own house." She heard him exhale, a sound like air leaving a punctured tire. When he spoke again, his voice had aged a decade. "How long were they?" "The ME's preliminary says they were alive for 3 to 5 days after they disappeared, July 14th to sometime around the 18th or 19th. Another silence, heavier this time. Cross let it sit. "We searched that property," Millhouse finally said. "I was there. We walked every inch, inside and out, called their names for hours." "I know, they heard you." "What?" Cross looked back at the excavation site, at the dark cavity that had held so much suffering for so long. Robert left messages on the walls. The last one was from Diane. She wrote that they heard you calling but couldn't answer. The sound that came through the phone might have been a sob or might have been a curse. Cross couldn't tell, didn't need to. "Who did it?" Millhouse asked. "Man named Samuel Hargrave, contractor who worked on their foundation in 1984, built the space himself. Robert's message says Hargrave was blackmailing him, came to the house Tuesday night with a gun, forced them in there, and sealed them up." "Hargrave," Millhouse's voice sharpened with recognition. "I interviewed him. He had an alibi. A weak one according to your notes, 6-hour gap." "Son of a bitch. Where is he now?" "That's the next call I need to make," Cross said. "I'm sending a team to Charlotte to track his business records. If he's alive, he's 73. If he's dead, I want to know when and where." "Allison," Millhouse said, using her first name for the first time in their acquaintance. "When you get him, if you get him, make it count. Those people died listening to us walk away." "I will." She ended the call and turned back to the site. The forensics team was packing up for the night, securing the crawlspace with tarps and crime scene tape. Tomorrow they'd return to document every square inch, collect samples, map the tomb in 3 dimensions. But Cross already had what she needed. The name, the method, the motive sketched in scratches on concrete walls. Samuel Hargrave had built the perfect hiding place. Then he'd turned it into a grave. Now, 38 years later, his secret had climbed out of the dark. Marcus approached, holding an evidence bag containing the broken watch. "We're done for today. What's next?" Cross took the bag, studying the frozen hands. 3:17. Afternoon or morning? Had Diane smashed it deliberately, trying to leave one more piece of evidence? Or had it simply broken as she clawed at the walls? "Next," Cross said, "we find out everything about Samuel Hargrave. Where he lived, where he worked, who he knew. I want his paper trail from birth to now." She handed the watch back. "And I want to know if he built any other spaces like this one." Marcus's eyes widened slightly. "You think there might be others?" "I think men who build tombs don't usually stop at one." The county clerk's office in Seabrook smelled like old paper and mildew. Detective Allison Cross sat at a corner table on the second floor, surrounded by stacks of property files that dated back to the early 1980s. Dust motes swirled in the afternoon light filtering through the tall windows overlooking Market Street. She'd been here since 8 that morning. The archivist, a thin woman named Linda, with reading glasses on a beaded chain, had pulled every document related to the Kessler property at 1247 Ocean Drive. Cross worked methodically, arranging the papers in chronological order, building a timeline of ownership and construction that stretched back to 1947. The original cottage had been built by a fishing family named Porter. Simple structure, elevated on pilings, designed to weather storms. The land had changed hands 3 times before Robert and Diane Kessler purchased it in May 1983 for $185,000. Cross found the building permit for the new house, dated September 1983. Standard construction, approved by the county, inspected at multiple stages. The foundation was poured in November of that year. Final certificate of occupancy issued in March 1984. Everything appeared normal. Then, tucked between mortgage refinancing documents and a routine septic inspection, Cross found what she'd been searching for. A permit application dated June 12, 1984, filed 14 months after the house was completed. Nature of work, foundation reinforcement and structural update. Estimated cost, $8,500. Contractor, Hargrave Construction, Charlotte, NC. License number, NC47821B. At the bottom, in neat block letters, Samuel C. Hargrave. Cross's pulse quickened. She scanned down to the inspection schedule. The box was empty. No inspector had ever signed off. No completion date was recorded. The permit had simply been filed and forgotten, lost in the bureaucratic shuffle of a small coastal county. She photographed the document with her phone, then pulled out her laptop. The clerk's office had recently installed Wi-Fi, a miracle Linda had told her proudly, and cross-connected to the North Carolina Licensing Board database. License NC47821B had been issued in 1979 to Samuel Clifford Hargrave, registered address in Charlotte. The license had expired in 1992, never renewed. Cross ran a broader search. Hargrave Construction appeared in scattered records across the state, mostly residential jobs, small renovations, deck additions. Nothing remarkable. The business dissolved in 1988, but the timeline bothered her. Samuel Hargrave had worked on the Kessler house in 1984, 3 years before they disappeared. Detective Milhouse's notes mentioned interviewing a contractor, but the name hadn't been prominent. The alibi had checked out, more or less, and the investigation had moved on. Cross pulled up Milhouse's original file on her laptop. She'd scanned every page yesterday, creating a searchable database. She typed Hargrave into the search function. One hit. Interview with Samuel Hargrave, July 22, 1987. Subject was cooperative. Denied recent contact with the Kesslers. Stated he had performed foundation work in 1984 but had not returned to the property since completion. Alibi for July 14th. Working on a deck installation in Virginia Beach. Verified by client Randall Morrison. 804-55-0921. Subject departed Virginia Beach approximately 4 p.m. Arrived late to job site on July 14th, approximately 3:30 p.m. 6-hour gap requires follow-up. Milhouse had noted the gap, but there was no follow-up report in the file. Cross leaned back, staring at the permit application. Foundation reinforcement. Structural update. What did that actually mean? She called Ron Carmichael, the engineer who'd discovered the crawl space. Detective Cross, he answered on the second ring. Find something? Question for you. When you uncovered that hidden space, you said the house was built over an older foundation without properly removing it. Correct. The 1947 cottage foundation was never demolished. They just built the new foundation around and over it. But that's not standard, right? It would require deliberate effort to create that configuration. Absolutely. You'd have to pour a new slab with intentional gaps. Build supporting walls to span the void. It's not something that happens by accident. Someone designed it that way. Cross felt the pieces sliding into place. Could that have been done after the main house was built? Carmichael was quiet for a moment. Yes, actually. If someone excavated beneath an existing foundation and poured new supporting structures, they could create exactly what we found. It would be risky as hell. You'd be undermining the whole house temporarily, but with proper shoring, it's possible. How long would that take? Couple of weeks, maybe 3, depending on the scope. You'd need permits, inspections. What if you didn't get inspections? Another pause. Then nobody would ever know it was there. Cross thanked him and ended the call. She turned back to her laptop and opened a new search window. Time to dig into Samuel Clifford Hargrave. The first few results were innocuous. Business registrations, a Charlotte phone directory listing from 1982. Then she found a newspaper archive from the Charlotte Observer, a small article dated March 1979. Local contractor begins new business after release. Samuel Hargrave, 37, recently released after serving 4 years at Central Prison in Raleigh, has obtained a general contractor's license and established Hargrave Construction. Mr. Hargrave was convicted in 1974 on charges of extortion and fraud related to renovation work performed for elderly clients in the Winston-Salem area. Cross's hands went still on the keyboard. She pulled up the North Carolina Department of Corrections database and entered his name. The record appeared, sparse but damning. Inmate Knocksugar 197408847, Samuel Clifford Brennan, a.k.a. Samuel Hargrave. Convicted, March 1975. Charges, extortion, fraud, criminal threatening. Sentence, 8 years. Released, January 1979. Good behavior. Brennan, not Hargrave. He'd changed his name. Cross began pulling everything she could find on Samuel Brennan. Court records appeared, detailing a pattern that made her stomach turn. Between 1971 and 1974, Brennan had targeted wealthy homeowners in isolated areas, offering renovation services at reasonable rates. During the work, he'd discover or fabricate structural issues that required expensive fixes. When clients couldn't or wouldn't pay, he'd escalate. Veiled threats, anonymous letters, even staging minor property damage to frighten them into compliance. One victim, a widow in Winston-Salem, had reported that Brennan seemed to know intimate details about her home, her schedule, her fears. He'd created hidden access points during renovations, allowing him to enter the house at will. The case that finally brought him down involved a couple in their 70s. Brennan had discovered that their home was sinking, demanded $30,000 to fix it. When they refused, their car's brake lines had been cut. The husband had survived the resulting crash. Police found evidence linking Brennan to the scene. Cross printed the mugshot from his 1974 arrest. A man in his early 30s stared back at her. Dark hair, strong jawline, an expression that managed to be both confident and contemptuous. She compared it to her notes from Milhouse's file. The contractor who'd worked on the Kessler house would have been around 42 in 1984. The ages matched. Outside, the afternoon sun was beginning to sink toward the horizon. Cross's phone buzzed with a text from the forensics lab. The complete transcription of the wall etchings was ready. She gathered her documents and thanked Linda, who was preparing to close the office for the day. "Find what you needed?" the archivist asked. "I did," Cross said. "Thank you." She drove to the Brunswick County Sheriff's Office, where the investigation had established a temporary command center. The building was a low brick structure on Highway 179, surrounded by scrub pine. Inside, the conference room had been transformed into a case wall. Photos, timelines, evidence logs. The transcription was waiting on the table, printed on clean white paper. Cross read it again, Robert Kessler's desperate chronicle of blackmail and theft, his confession that he'd hidden stolen pharmaceutical formulas, that Hargrave had discovered them and bled him for 3 years. He said he'd tell the company, tell the police, ruin us. We paid him $8,500 for the foundation work in 1984, then $2,000 in 1985, another $3,000 in 1986. He called Tuesday, said he needed $50,000 or he was going to Altrex, going to the newspapers. I told him we didn't have it. He said he'd come by Tuesday evening to discuss options. He came with a gun, forced us down here, said we'd be comfortable enough for a day or two while he figured out what to do with us. Left us a flashlight, a jug of water, then sealed the opening. That was Tuesday night. It's Friday now. The water ran out yesterday. Diane is... The writing had stopped there, resumed in smaller, shakier letters. She's sleeping. I keep telling her someone will find us. She believes me. I don't know if I believe myself anymore." The final message, in Diane's handwriting, had been etched later. The medical examiner estimated it was written shortly before she died. "We heard you calling for us. We're so sorry we couldn't answer." Cross set the transcription down. She thought of Millhouse, standing on the beach in 1987, calling their names. Thought of search parties combing the property while the Kesslers sat in the darkness below, probably already too weak to scream. She opened her laptop and began a comprehensive search for Samuel Brennan, post-1987. Social Security, DMV records, credit reports, arrest records, nothing. She expanded the search to surrounding states, then nationwide. Employment records, tax filings, property ownership, nothing. It was as if he'd vanished. Inside the cordoned crawl space, the forensics technician adjusts her position, knees pressed against cold concrete. She sweeps a portable UV lamp across the rough wall in slow, deliberate arcs. Detective Allison Cross crouches beside her, notepad balanced on one thigh, flashlight in hand. "Here," the technician says, her voice tight. "Under UV, the calcium deposits from skin oils fluoresce differently than the concrete. See?" Cross leans closer. Under the violet glow, faint scratches emerge from the gray surface, words clawed into existence by fingernails and desperation. The letters are uneven, some barely legible, others gouged deep enough to leave permanent scars in the foundation. "Can you photograph each section?" Cross asks. "I need the sequence preserved exactly as it appears." The technician nods, positioning her camera. The shutter clicks in rapid succession, each flash freezing the dead's testimony. Cross begins transcribing, her handwriting cramped in the dim light. The first message sits highest on the wall, the letters large and angular. July 14th, 1987. Tuesday night, Hargrave came asking for money. I said no more. He pulled a gun, made us come down here. Below it, smaller, the writing more frantic. He knows about the Altrex documents. I stole them before I retired. Proprietary formulas worth millions. I hid them in the walls upstairs, 1985. He found them during the renovation, been paying him since then. Cross pauses, processing. Robert Kessler's pharmaceutical theft. The blackmail. The renovation that created this tomb. She continues reading. Diane didn't know until last month. I told her everything she wanted to go to police. I said, no, too scared now. Hargrave wants 5,000 final payment. I don't have it. The next section shows deteriorating penmanship, the letters shakier. Been here. 2 days, maybe 3. No water left. Diane is weak. We tried screaming. Nobody hears. The concrete is too thick. Cross feels her throat tighten. She forces herself to keep reading. I did this. I brought this on us. My greed, my paranoia, my secrets. I killed my wife as surely as if I sealed this tomb myself. Then, farther down, a single line in block capitals. If anyone finds this Samuel Hargrave, Charlotte, Hargrave Construction, did this, he is a murderer. The technician shifts the UV lamp lower. Detective, look at this. The handwriting changes. The letters are smaller, more careful despite obvious fatigue. Diane's hand. Robert stopped talking yesterday morning. I think he is dying. I held him through the night. I can hear sounds above us. People walking, talking, searching. I tried to scream, but nothing comes out anymore. Cross blinks hard, clearing her vision. The technician's breathing has gone ragged. The final message sits lowest on the wall, just above where Diane's body had been positioned. The letters are barely visible, scratched with what must have been her last strength. We heard you calling for us. We're so sorry we couldn't answer. Cross sets down her pen. She sits back on her heels, the UV lamp casting purple shadows across her face. Behind her, the opening to the crawl space frames a rectangle of daylight. The sounds of the beach filtering in. Waves, gulls, distant traffic on Ocean Drive. They were alive, the technician whispers. During the search, Milhouse and his team walked right over them. For days, Cross says, her voice hollow. The medical examiner estimated they survived 3 to 5 days sealed in here. The original missing persons report was filed July 16th. Coast Guard searched through the 19th. She looks at the final message again. They heard the search parties. They knew rescue was feet away. The technician lowers the UV lamp, her hands trembling. How do you write that? Knowing you're dying? Knowing people are looking for you and you can't make them hear? Cross doesn't answer. There is no answer. She stands, joints protesting from the cramped position, and climbs carefully out of the crawl space. Outside, the March sun feels obscene, warm and bright while her mind catalogues the darkness she's just read. Ron Carmichael, the engineer, approaches with a tablet showing structural diagrams. Detective, I've confirmed the crawlspace was accessible only through a concealed hatch in the original foundation. Hargrave would have sealed it with fresh concrete, probably a thin pour that set within hours. From the outside, it would have been invisible, just part of the existing foundation work. Could they have broken through? Cross asks. If they'd had tools, something to chip away the concrete? Carmichael shakes his head. Not without serious equipment. The concrete was standard mix, 4,000 psi. Even a sledgehammer would have taken hours, and they'd have needed leverage, space to swing. In that confined area, with their hands, he stops, seeing her expression. No, they had no chance. Cross turns to the ocean. The Atlantic stretches gray-green to the horizon, the same water that had been searched in 1987 while Robert and Diane died beneath the sand. A patrol car idles at the property line, keeping onlookers back. News vans have begun arriving, their satellite dishes sprouting like mechanical flowers. She pulls out her phone and dials Frank Milhouse's number. He answers on the second ring. Detective Cross. Frank, I'm at the site. We've documented everything scratched on the walls. She hears him breathing, waiting. It's bad. Worse than we thought. Tell me. She does. She reads him Robert's confession about the stolen Altrex documents, the blackmail that started in 1985, Hargrave's final demand, and the gunpoint abduction. She reads Diane's words about hearing the search parties, about holding Robert as he died. When she finishes, silence fills the line. Then a sound, half sob, half rage, that makes Cross's chest ache. We walked over them, Milhouse says finally. My team. We searched that property. The dogs went through the yard. I stood on that deck calling their names. His voice breaks. They heard me. They heard us, and we left them. You couldn't have known. The crawlspace was completely sealed, built into the original foundation work. There was nothing to indicate. I should have torn that house apart, board by board. I should have... He stops. Cross hears him pulling himself together, the old cop discipline reasserting itself. The messages name Hargrave. That's confirmation. You have enough for an arrest warrant if he's alive. I'm working on locating him now. DMV, property records, employment history post-1987. He can't have disappeared completely. He sealed 2 people in a tomb and left them to die, Milhouse says quietly. He's capable of anything. Be careful, detective. After they hang up, Cross finds the forensics technician emerging from the crawlspace with sealed evidence bags containing the fragments of Diane's wristwatch, the broken crystal, the cracked leather band, the hands frozen at 3:17, the makeshift chisel that scratched the final message. Bag and tag everything, Cross instructs. I want photos of every inch of that space, measurements, concrete samples. If there's any trace evidence Hargrave left behind, hair, fiber, anything, I need it. Jennifer Tang approaches from her position near the engineer's truck, her arms wrapped around herself despite the warm afternoon. Detective, how long were they down there? Cross considers deflecting, protecting her from the worst details. But Jennifer owns this land, lived above this tomb unknowingly. She deserves truth. Based on the messages and the medical examiner's initial findings, they survived approximately 4 days after being sealed in. They died within hours of each other, likely on July 18th. Jennifer's face crumples. I bought this house in 2022. I've lived here 3 years. I slept above them. I had dinner parties, conference calls. I walked across that deck every morning with my coffee. She looks at Cross, her eyes desperate. How do I live with that? You didn't know. No one knew except the man who put them there. That doesn't make it better. Jennifer stares at the excavated foundation, the dark opening now surrounded by police tape and evidence markers. I keep thinking about sounds. Did I ever hear anything? Footsteps that weren't mine? Voices? Was this place haunted and I just didn't listen? Cross thinks of Margaret Cho's testimony from 1987, her description of feeling watched in the house. She thinks of the nightmares Margaret mentioned, the unease that followed her for decades. Perhaps the house had been haunted, not by ghosts, but by the terrible gravity of unanswered suffering sealed beneath the floors. The property is a crime scene, Cross says gently. You won't be returning to live here. My recommendation would be to sell once we release it, or donate the land for something public. A memorial, maybe. Tear it all down, Jennifer says immediately. I don't want any part of it standing. When you're done with your investigation, I want it demolished, foundation and all. Let someone build something new, something clean. Cross nods. She understands the impulse to erase, to bury the darkness under fresh concrete and new lumber. But she knows, too, that some stains run deeper than any demolition can reach. Her phone buzzes. A text from the background investigator she'd tasked with tracking Samuel Hargrave's post-1987 movements. Need you back at the station. Found something on Hargrave, Brennan. Important. Cross excuses herself and heads for her car. As she drives away from Ocean Drive, she watches the Kessler property shrink in her rearview mirror. The police tape, the excavation equipment, the dark wound in the foundation where 2 people died calling for help that never came. The final message replays in her mind. We heard you calling for us. We're so sorry we couldn't answer. Detective Allison Cross sat in her temporary command center at the Brunswick County Sheriff's Office, a cramped conference room that smelled of old coffee and copied paper. She'd pinned Samuel Brennan's 1975 mugshot to the whiteboard beside a timeline stretching from 1984 to 2025. Beside it, a map of the eastern seaboard waited for pins that would trace his movements. Her phone buzzed, a text from her background investigator. Found something. Multiple SSN hits post 87. Calling now. Cross picked up on the first ring. Detective, it's Karen Ruiz from Records Division. The woman's voice carried the rushed excitement of someone who'd been digging through databases for hours. You asked for any trace of Samuel Brennan or Hargrave after 1987. I found him. Cross straightened, pen poised over her notepad. Where? That's the thing. Everywhere. I've got a Social Security earnings record showing quarterly payments from various construction companies across 5 states between 1988 and 2003. All cash basis contractors, all small operations. He was working, detective, consistently. The pen stilled. Cross had expected nothing. A ghost who'd fled after the murders, perhaps died in obscurity. Instead, Brennan had simply continued his life. Which states? South Carolina, primarily, Myrtle Beach area since 1995. Before that, he moved around. Georgia, Tennessee, back to Virginia Beach. Always coastal towns, always renovation work. Papers rustled on Ruiz's end. Last registered address is a mobile home park in Myrtle Beach. Meadowbrook Estates, Lot 47. Tax records show he still owns it. Cross was already pulling up a map on her laptop. Myrtle Beach was 93 miles south on Highway 17. Less than 2 hours. Any criminal record? Arrests? Clean. Not even a speeding ticket since 1987. Ruiz paused. He's been hiding in plain sight, detective. Working under his real name. Paying taxes. If you weren't specifically looking for him in connection to the Kesslers, you'd never know. Cross thanked her and hung up, immediately dialing Frank Milhouse's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice rough with age and the weight of sleepless nights since she told him about the crawlspace. "We found him," Cross said without preamble. "Samuel Brennan. He's alive, Frank, living in Myrtle Beach." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that she thought the call had dropped. Then Milhouse spoke, his voice barely controlled. "Alive. This whole time. I'm coordinating with Myrtle Beach PD now. We'll need to move carefully. If he's been free for 38 years, he's either very careful or very confident. I want to be there when you take him." Cross heard what he didn't say, the need to look into the eyes of the man who'd let him search that property while the Kesslers died beneath his feet. "I'll call you when we're ready to move." She spent the next 3 hours building her case. A conference call with the Brunswick County DA confirmed they had enough for an arrest warrant. The etched confession naming Hargrave, the 1984 permit fraud, the concealed space accessible only to its builder. Physical evidence from the crawlspace, a cigarette butt that predated the ceiling, likely Brennan's, was being rush-tested for DNA. By late afternoon, Cross was coordinating with Detective Luis Martinez of the Myrtle Beach Police Department, a soft-spoken investigator with 20 years on the job. "We've got eyes on the property now," Martinez told her over the phone. "Mobile home's in rough shape, but there's a truck in the driveway. South Carolina plates registered to Samuel Brennan, age 73. Cross felt her pulse quicken. "Is he home?" "Uncertain. We've seen no movement, but we're maintaining distance until you arrive. How soon can you be here?" 90 minutes. She grabbed her jacket and weapon, stopped at Milhouse's house to pick him up despite protocol suggesting otherwise. He was waiting on his porch in a pressed shirt, the gun he'd kept from his police days holstered at his hip. They drove south in tense silence, the coast flashing past. Calabash, Little River, the tourism sprawl of North Myrtle Beach giving way to the older, shabbier stretches where hurricane damage still showed in blue tarps and empty lots. Meadowbrook Estates sat 2 miles inland, a grid of tired mobile homes on quarter-acre lots shaded by scraggly pines. Martinez met them at the entrance, a compact man with alert eyes. "No movement yet," he said, falling in step beside Cross as they walked toward Lot 47. "We've got units positioned on the access roads. If he runs, we'll catch him." The mobile home was a faded, beige, single-wide with lattice skirting and a small wooden deck. The truck in the driveway was a 1990s Ford, its blue paint oxidized to powder. Blinds covered every window. Cross approached the front door with Martinez flanking her, Milhouse staying back with 2 uniformed officers. She knocked firmly, her badge ready. "Samuel Brennan, Myrtle Beach Police. We need to speak with you." Silence. She knocked again, harder. "Mr. Brennan, we have a warrant for your arrest. Open the door." Still nothing. Martinez nodded to one of his officers who moved to check the rear entrance. Cross tried the handle. Locked. She was about to authorize forced entry when her phone buzzed. The text was from the forensics lab in Brunswick County. DNA match confirmed. Cigarette butt, inks Brennan. Proceeding with full evidence workup. She showed Martinez. "We're going in." The officer returned from the rear. "Back door's open. Looks like it's been that way a while. Frame's warped." They entered through the front, Cross leading with her weapon drawn. The interior smelled of cigarette smoke and mildew, the afternoon light filtering weakly through the blinds. The main living area was cluttered but organized, newspapers stacked in chronological order, tools arranged by size on a pegboard, photographs covering one entire wall. Cross moved closer to the photographs, her skin crawling. Houses, dozens of them. All beachfront properties in various states of renovation. She recognized the Kessler house immediately. 3 photos showing different angles of the 1984 foundation work, the concrete forms, the finished exterior that concealed the tomb. Beside those photos, newspaper clippings. Local couple vanishes from Seabrook home. Search continues for missing Kesslers. Case goes cold after 6 months. Milhouse appeared at her shoulder, staring at the wall. His breathing had gone shallow. Martinez was checking the bedrooms. "Clear, no one's here." Cross holstered her weapon, pulling on latex gloves to examine the collection more closely. The photographs weren't just of the Kessler house. There were others, a waterfront cottage in what looked like South Carolina, a ranch-style home with Georgia pines in the background, a modern beach house that might have been in Virginia. All renovation projects. All with Brennan's careful documentation. Detective. Martinez stood in the doorway to the back bedroom, his face grim. "You need to see this." The bedroom was sparse, a narrow bed, a filing cabinet, a desk covered in papers. But the floor had been modified. A section of cheap linoleum had been cut away, revealing a wooden panel beneath. Martinez had already lifted it. A crawl space, just like the one under the Kessler house. Cross knelt beside the opening, shining her flashlight into the darkness. The beam caught metal, a footlocker, industrial grade, with a combination lock. "Get bolt cutters," she said. While they waited, she photographed everything. The modified floor, the precise cuts, the way the panel sat flush when closed. Brennan had built himself an echo of his crime, a secret space in his own home. The lock snapped under the cutter's pressure. Cross opened the footlocker, her stomach tightening at what lay inside. Photographs. Dozens of them, organized in labeled folders. The first folder was marked Kessler, 1987. She forced herself to look. The images showed the crawlspace from inside before it was sealed. Robert and Diane, bound and terrified, staring at the camera in the harsh light of a flash. Sequential shots documenting their deterioration. The second day, the third. Brennan had visited them, photographed them dying, then left them again. The final photo showed them still, bodies slumped together. Cross's hands shook as she set the folder aside and reached for the next. Morrison, Virginia Beach, 1989. Another couple. Another sealed space. Another series of photographs. There were 6 folders total. Milhouse had walked away, his footsteps heavy on the thin floor. Cross heard him outside, retching into the bushes. Martinez was on his phone, calling for additional units, for evidence teams, for the medical examiner. Cross sat back on her heels, staring at the footlocker's contents. Beside the photo folders lay journals, composition notebooks filled with Brennan's neat handwriting. She opened the most recent one, dated 2024. The entries read like technical documentation, dimensions of crawl spaces, notes on concrete density and soundproofing, observations about how long each victim survived, which variables affected their endurance. There was no remorse, no humanity, just data. The final entry was dated 3 weeks ago. Time grows short. The work should be recognized. Those who find this will understand the precision required, the patience. I have been careful, methodical, but perhaps it is time to stop hiding. Cross closed the journal, her professional detachment cracking. Brennan hadn't just killed the Kesslers and disappeared. He'd refined his method, repeated it, documented everything with the pride of a craftsman. And now he was gone. She stood, looking around the mobile home with new eyes. Nothing appeared packed or disturbed. The dish in the sink was from this morning. A single coffee cup, rinsed and drying. The truck outside suggested he had left without obvious haste. The house showed no sign of struggle, nothing to indicate a frantic departure. Cross felt the cold certainty settle over her. They had found the evidence, but the man responsible had slipped away again, and the hunt was only beginning. The Ohio cemetery sat quiet under a cold March sky, its rows of modest headstones stretching across gently rolling hills. No more than 15 people gathered at the gravesite. Distant cousins, former neighbors who'd made the drive from Seabrook, a handful of elderly friends who remembered the Kesslers when they were young. The casket was simple, polished oak. Inside, the commingled remains of Robert Dwayne Kessler and Diane Maribel Kessler rested together for the first time in nearly 4 decades. Detective Allison Cross stood at the edge of the assembly, apart from the family. She'd flown in the night before, felt obligated to witness this final chapter. Beside her, Frank Milhouse watched in silence, his weathered hands clasped before him. He'd aged visibly in the months since the discovery, the lines around his eyes deeper, his shoulders more stooped. The minister spoke about rest and peace, about mysteries beyond human understanding. The words felt hollow to Cross, scripted comfort for an uncomforting truth. She watched Gerald Kessler, Robert's brother, stare at the casket with an expression somewhere between grief and disgust. Carolyn, Diane's sister, wept quietly, her husband's arm around her shoulders. They knew everything now. The theft, the blackmail, the final terrible bargain that had gone catastrophically wrong. The wall scratchings had told the story in brutal detail. Robert's confession, his apology to Diane, her forgiveness scratched in return. The medical examiner's report had filled in the rest. 4 days of darkness, of hearing rescue teams walking overhead, of hope slowly dying. The casket began its descent. Gerald turned away before it reached the bottom. Afterward, Cross and Milhouse stood by their rental car, watching the sparse gathering disperse. Carolyn approached them, her eyes red-rimmed. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice soft, "for finding them." "I'm sorry it took so long," Cross replied. Carolyn shook her head. "Diane wrote to me, 3 weeks before—" She stopped, swallowed. She said Robert was different, that she was worried about him. I told her it was probably just stress, that early retirement was hard on men. Her voice cracked. I should have listened, should have visited. "You couldn't have known," Milhouse said gently. "Neither could you," Carolyn said, looking at him. "But you still blame yourself. I can see it." She touched his arm briefly. "Diane wouldn't want that. She never blamed anyone for anything." After she left, Milhouse turned to Cross. "She's wrong," he said quietly. "I should have pushed harder on Hargrave, should have verified that alibi tighter." "He died 5 days later," Cross reminded him. "Even if you'd arrested him that first week, they'd already been—" She stopped, unable to finish. "Sealed in," Milhouse completed. "I know. Doesn't help." They drove back to the airport in silence, passing through small Ohio towns that looked frozen in time. Cross kept thinking about Diane's final message. "We heard you calling for us." "I talked to Paul Devereaux last week," Milhouse said suddenly. "He's selling his place in Seabrook. Says he can't look at that lot anymore." "Jennifer Tang already sold hers," Cross said, "to a developer who's turning it into a public memorial garden." "Margaret Cho wants to plant it," Milhouse added. "Called me to ask if I thought that would be appropriate. I told her yes." Cross nodded. She'd spoken with Margaret, too, heard the older woman's voice shake as she described the nightmares she'd carried for 38 years. "I always felt watched in that house," Margaret had said. "Now I know why." Because Hargrave had been watching. During the 3 years before he died, he'd kept the secret of the crawlspace, likely visiting it to ensure the bodies remained hidden. Margaret had been cleaning above a tomb, week after week, sensing something terrible without knowing what. At the airport, Milhouse turned to Cross before they separated for different gates. "What haunts you most?" he asked. She didn't have to think about it. The timing. If Hargrave had lived even a week longer, he might have returned, might have staged their disappearance properly like he planned. They would have been found in the ocean, written off as a drowning. No one would have known the truth. And if he'd died a day earlier, Milhouse said, they might have been saved. The thought had occurred to Cross, too. Hargrave's car accident happened on July 19th, the same day the Coast Guard called off the search. The Kesslers were still alive in the crawlspace. If Hargrave had crashed a day sooner, if he'd carried ID that connected him to the Kesslers, if investigators had searched his belongings and found some evidence of the crime. But he hadn't, and they didn't. 2 months later, Detective Cross stood on the vacant lot where the Kessler house had been. The demolition had been thorough, foundation jackhammered to rubble, every trace of the structure erased. The lot sat scraped and level, waiting. Margaret Cho was already there directing a crew of landscapers. She'd designed the memorial garden herself, native beach roses, sea oats, a winding path of crushed oyster shells. At the center, a simple granite bench facing the ocean. "Detective," Margaret greeted her, wiping soil from her hands. "It's beautiful," Cross said honestly. "They would have liked it." "Mrs. Kessler loved gardens," Margaret replied. "When I first started working for them, she had flower beds all around the deck, hibiscus mostly. They died the winter after." She gestured at the ground beneath them. Cross watched as workers set the granite bench in place. The inscription was brief: "For Robert and Diane Kessler. May they rest in light." "Jennifer Tang wanted me to thank you," Margaret added, "for helping her understand the house's history. She said knowing the truth, even though it's terrible, helps her sleep better." "Does it help you?" Cross asked. Margaret considered. "A little. I always felt I'd abandoned them somehow, by not realizing something was wrong that Tuesday. But they were already." She stopped. "I couldn't have saved them." A cement truck rumbled up, beginning the process of pouring a new foundation. This one for the gardens. Pavilion, where visitors could rest and look out at the sea. Cross watched the concrete flow, thick and gray, filling the forms. She thought about what lay buried here before. Fear, darkness, desperate hope fading day by day. The Kesslers had spent their final hours in absolute blackness, listening to the world continue above them. They'd heard rescue teams calling their names, heard footsteps pass overhead, heard life go on while theirs ended. The medical examiner's estimate had been precise. Robert died first, likely on the 4th day. Diane survived him by hours, perhaps less. They'd been found sitting side by side, her hand resting on his, a final gesture of comfort in the dark. Frank Milhouse appeared at the edge of the lot, hands in his pockets. He'd driven down from his retirement place in Virginia, called Cross to say he needed to see the space one last time. "It's gone," he said, looking at the empty ground. "That's the point," Cross replied. They stood together as the landscapers worked, transforming the site of horror into something peaceful. A couple walking their dogs stopped to read the temporary sign explaining the memorial. They bowed their heads briefly before moving on. "I put in my retirement papers," Cross said. "Official date is June 1st. Milhouse looked at her. "This case did it." "This case and others. But yes, mostly this one." She'd been having her own nightmares. The crawlspace, the scratched messages, Diane's final words. "I can't stop thinking about the 4 days, what they talked about. If they fought or forgave, if they knew Hargrave was already dead, that no one was coming back." "They didn't know," Milhouse said quietly. "Robert's last message, the one he scratched the 3rd day, he was still expecting Hargrave might return." Cross had read that message too, transcribed in the forensics report. "If anyone finds this, Hargrave did this. Samuel Hargrave from Charlotte. Make him pay." But Hargrave had already paid, in his own way. A moment's inattention on a rain-slicked Florida highway, a collision with a concrete barrier. Dead on impact, the Highway Patrol report said. Quick and meaningless, a random tragedy that became the final twist in the Kesslers' slow death. The landscapers planted the first rose bush, its roots settling into soil that held no trace of what came before. Margaret knelt beside them, adjusting the placement, her careful hands treating the work like a sacred duty. "She comes here every day," Milhouse said. "Paul Devereaux told me. Even before the garden was finished, she'd stand on the empty lot and pray. For them? For everyone. The Kesslers, Hargrave's other victims, herself." He paused. "Did you read the file on the other cases? The couples in Virginia, South Carolina, Tennessee?" Cross had. 4 other hidden spaces discovered in the Footlocker's documentation. 4 other tombs built by Hargrave's hands. But only the Kesslers had been found. The other properties had been demolished or extensively renovated, any evidence erased by time and construction. "I sent letters to the families," she said, "the ones we could locate. Told them what we found, that their missing relatives were likely Hargrave's victims, too." "Did it help them?" "How could it?" Cross shook her head. "We can't prove their people were murdered, can't give them bodies to bury, just knowledge that their worst fears were probably true." The cement truck finished pouring. Workers smoothed the foundation with long tools, creating a surface that would soon support the garden's pavilion. In a few months, visitors would sit here, watching the waves, never knowing the darkness that once existed in this exact spot. Cross's phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at the screen, an automated message from headquarters closing the case file, and then silenced it, tucking the device away. For a long time, she simply stood and watched the ocean, the sound of surf and the scent of salt and roses folding around her until the sharp edges of the months before dulled enough that, for the first time in a long while, she could breathe.